Hi everyone and welcome back to the Old School RN. Today I just wanted to go over a topic that I've been mulling over quite a while. I'd been to the Lucy Letby conference in March because I'm part of a group, a wonderful group called 19 Nurses, an organisation that started with 19 nurses and has grown exponentially in terms of members. And quite a lot of the people that have joined are either retired, semi-retired, or currently working in the NHS. And we're all there to support Lucy with her future case review. Hopefully she will be out in 2026. That would be amazing. And in these conferences, there's a lot of sort of academic, legal, ethical, and other topics surrounding NHS care that's being given to our patients by nurses, and the way that something can be blown out of all proportion and turned into something entirely different that ends up with somebody innocent being placed in jail. That's a very intricate case. It contains a lot of information. There were 15 babies involved in this, and many experts have found big gaps in what's going on. So those gaps are really what are being discussed, and I won't go into gross detail because I don't want this to cause any issues for anybody, and I certainly don't want it to cause any negative issues for Lucy's case review. But what I will say is there are a few speakers who really stood out for me. There were many and they were all great, but there was quite a few that stood out. And one of them led the introduction, and her name is Clare McGourley. Now, Clare, her talk, which went on in Manchester University, 15th of November this year, 2025. Clare's background is legal. There were quite a few solicitors, barristers present who gave their perspective and things, and it can be found on the internet. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. But the key things that I found about Clare's discussion was, and I'm going to read this out because there were quite a few notes and I've made quite a few notes. She spoke from a nursing leadership point of view. She was looking at the way nurses document and the clinical governance that we adhere to, and how when we're reporting things that are not quite right, we use a system called DATIX, D-A-T-I-X. And it's a system whereby we can whistleblow. We can highlight issues on a ward, whether they're unsafe, dirty, unsanitary, problems with nurse-patient ratios, acuity of patients, i.e. how severely ill they are, or their needs are very high. And that all comes under the realm of clinical governance. And it also impacts on us under our National Code of Conduct, which is a register under the NMC, Nursing and Midwifery Council. That means when we sign up to this and pay for the privilege, by the way, £120 a year just to be registered, we have to adhere to these guidelines. And these guidelines are embraced in law, about ethics and care of your patients, and consideration for how those patients are being nursed, the kind of environment they're in, etc. So this all ties in with clinical governance and how a unit, a ward or a department is run. Okay, so the staff concerns, many nurses have concerns, and sometimes they can just be sounding off, oh, I'm fed up with the way the boiler doesn't work, I can't get a cup of tea, I'm sick of waiting 3 minutes for the kettle, which sounds like it's simple, but it's not. 3 minutes, you could have certain tasks done in that time. And nurses are very sort of time focused these days, whereas it wasn't so much back in the day. I mean, for routine care, not emergency, there was no time and target. But since this has been introduced by the government, they've relegated nurses and doctors to, sort of corporate factory people, and as if you're packing beans in a box or something, and you've got to get through so many boxes an hour. It doesn't work that way in healthcare. We're all needed to make society run, but that doesn't work in healthcare. We're dealing with human beings anyway. So staff discussions and rumour are something that tend to snowball in organisations that are high service, stressful service, police, fire, ambulance, NHS nursing, NHS hospitals, community, and it tends to snowball and gain legs. And the problem is, if it's heard often enough and from the same people, it tends to be taken as fact rather than looked at for what it is. That somebody isn't a troublemaker or labelled a troublemaker. They are in fact making a difference to getting that ward or department upgraded, or more finances, to improve the infrastructure or something. But if you're not part of the gang, this can be taken out of hand. And this was the inference that was made about how Lucy ended up being in the situation she was in. She also looked at how an informal concern can be turned into or grow into a dominant organisational narrative. And that ties in with whether you're popular in a ward or department too. Often whoever is in charge of an area, their personality will reflect the culture of that department. And if they're yes people, because they want to climb the hierarchy, the management hierarchy, and the pay and the perks that go with it, pension, etc., they'll often conform to what the trust tell them, and they will follow that on. They won't interpret it in the light of their own department. They'll just follow to keep the manager happy. Because if you keep your higher manager happy, you get on. Yeah, so often people in long-term posts have had to compromise themselves in some way to keep their pension and to keep their money, their grade. So they start to lose part of themselves, and that is part of the narrative that I think Dr. Clare was mentioning here, is that if you're not the popular one, you stand by your ethics, you stand by your patients, you produce datexes that are not personal. They're about the department, not the person running it. Or it could be if they're not good people, that's a different thing, bullying and whatever. But it's usually interpreted, anything that the person who's not as popular with the gang says can be turned into something else. And by the culture, I mean the medical culture too, because nurses and doctors work very closely together. So the consultants will work closely with senior staff, even a senior experienced staff nurse, in the case of Lucy, looking after babies. And Lucy went to work and study at the Liverpool Women's Hospital, where she saw proper care, high standards of care with scientific and research backup, and went back to Chester and noticed a difference and reported it. And of course, if people are jealous because her standards are high, that they don't like her for some reason, or they're going to, use her generosity of spirit against her, this is when rumours start, and this is when rumours take over, the rumour mill. The risk of confirmation bias once a particular narrative gains traction. And this was really interesting because, as Dr. Clare had said, it depends on who it's coming from. If it's coming from someone with authority, that's fine. It will be taken as read and everybody will adhere. But if it comes from somebody who isn't perceived as powerful or senior, particularly in nursing hierarchies, then they tend to bear the brunt. They're the scapegoat for the unit. And it certainly, to me, appears that Lucy was definitely that. And that she was mentioning, perhaps, what wasn't correct, what wasn't right, what wasn't safe. And certain consultants didn't like it. They felt that their authority was being usurped in some way. And I've seen that happen with nurses and doctors because of a power problem, power hierarchy. and also add in the management, because the management will always do what their agenda dictates to them. So if they see any conflict with nurses and doctors, you can be sure the management will exploit that to their advantage. And I say that from experience, and I've seen it too. Okay, discussed how high acuity, high stress environments increase susceptibility to speculation. Right, along with bullying in the health service, you tend to find, because people are working in high pressure environments, their outlet tends to be bitching. It tends to be negative. It tends to be about gossip and innuendo. And if all those other factors are present as well, that the person's unpopular or is so well qualified they're after the next promotion and deserve it because of their experience and nature and qualifications, then other people tend to get a little bit edgy. They don't like it. So they will keep repeating the narrative to people and discussing things behind people's backs. And then it becomes more solid, more concrete in the perception of other people. Addressing the role of hierarchy and power imbalance in limiting and challenging prevailing views. Like I just said, if it's doctors and consultants, it's very hard to change that narrative. Very, very difficult to get them to change their mind and look at things differently, because they don't like being challenged, many of them. Sometimes their egos, as a protective mechanism, will get the better of them, or maybe they're just not good people, and their job to them is just a job. Who knows? But the person, when you're working in healthcare, it's part of your persona. You can't separate it. You know, you're dealing with human lives, and people react to that stress and human lives in different ways. And I would say that Lucy went in with a kind of kind heart, but was, because she was younger and probably less experienced, her youth, her inexperience and her gullibility was used against her. She did it with everything she did with a good heart and meant it, but it was turned against her. That's how I see this. And again, like I said, the rumour mills carry on, and therefore she was the scapegoat. Now, I know she had a lot of support, and that there were senior nurses who were very good to her, including some of the managers too, who were definitely on her side. But what I found with the NHS is, when they have a gun to their head, they're told you toe the line and do X, Y, and Z, or your job's on the line, which happens because of corporacy. This is what goes on. Then those people tend to take the money, and they will. For example, before I come to the other issues, Tony Chambers, who was the chief executive of Countess of Chester, I've heard firsthand that he was very supportive of Lucy, and I'm sure he was. However, he left, and I don't know the circumstances around that, but he left that trust, maybe to go on to another role, maybe to do something in the background. I don't know. But he got paid a £1.5 million pension for that. So he may have even retired from the NHS, who knows? 1.5 million. Or stand by Lucy. Yeah, no words really, but this is the reality of the NHS. Emphasising the importance of structured escalation processes over informal information sharing. This is the datex and any documentation versus what is actually going on when you're handing over and speaking to other members of staff, like handing over a patient. If you don't bullet point and stick to what you've written, it can be seen as hearsay, and people can add in or take what they want from that, unless you're very, very sure of your documentation, particularly if somebody's got it in for you. Stands to reason. Getting the time to document is another matter, but we'll come to that. Highlight the need for robust documentation and contemporaneous record keeping. I've always said to nurses, keep a contemporaneous record. This is a kind of notebook. So you write down the date, the times, this happened today. You don't need to have identification of patients. You can just have patient number 1234 so that you know what their hospital number is, and you can feed back if you need to, if there's ever a disciplinary or some kind of management kind of discussion around your nursing care. And I encourage all nurses to do that. Keep a journal, keep a diary, and keep your contemporaneous notes, because if there's ever an issue, you can then refer back to that and have it to support your case. Not that you should be thinking this way, but in light of what's happened to Lucy, now you have to start doing so, because nurses are not going into NICU, neonatal intensive care, anymore. The numbers have dropped because this has highlighted how vulnerable they are. With lack of staff, there's nobody to turn to, there's nobody to witness X, Y, and Z. And units are notorious, any unit, any specialised unit, even theatre, for gossip and bullying and sidelining people, mobbing. Frame the issue as an organisational and governance responsibility, not an individual failing. This comes into the lessons to be learned, and the aircraft aviation industry know this very well. They don't blame the pilots. Some do if there's insurance claims involved. Look at Sully with the Hudson River incident. But it's about what can we learn from what's happened. But I suspect that doesn't happen because the managers know that it's because they're following the politics that these issues are happening at front line in the NHS. And I would go as far as to say, because the country and the governing bodies that run the country want the NHS to fail, they don't want to solve these problems. But that's my opinion as a registered nurse. Discuss the impact of unmanaged narrative on staff wellbeing and psychological safety. I think this all keys in to nurses having somewhere safe to speak out. This is something I do. I am a trained psychotherapist, but I don't work in psychotherapy anymore, but I do work in supervision. And when I discuss events in healthcare with nurses, with paramedics, etc., I can be an objective viewer, if you like, of what they're having to put up with and protect them legally as well by suggesting A, B, C, D, E, because they need that protection and they need to be able to offload to a safe, objective person. And I think that's where part of your CPD or your continuous professional development, and also having a safe haven to keep you psychologically fit, comes into play. And I am all for it. You can call it nursing supervision if you like, but that term has been a bit misused. The way it's used in therapy is very different from how it's used in nursing. And if anybody wants to know more, put it in the comments and I can do a video on that. Warnings of long-term workforce consequences, including disengagement, fear and attrition. Encouraging leaders to intervene early, separate concern from conclusion and maintain procedural fairness. Again, why wasn't this looked at early on? When the rumour mill was going, whoever was in charge of the department should have been looking at this and asking questions around, why is there gossip? Why are people saying X, Y, and Z? Why have we got this disconnect between the medical staff and the nursing staff? Why aren't we all working together? Why are we having these concerns? Because I would point that at the managers. This is a triangular relationship. Nurses, doctors, managers. And the managers, in my view, are the ones who cause the problems. And I say that from experience because when I worked in when I started my training and consequently qualified, we didn't have these managers. We didn't have them in hospitals. We didn't need or have this kind of corporate interference. But I've noticed ever since we've had this corporate interference that issues like this have arisen and bullying is rife. There's always been some kind of bullying. There's always been disagreements. I'm not saying it was all rainbows, but there wasn't the bullying and the psychological impact that we've got today. You know, you can't support this organisation, or you can't do this and you can't do that, and policies about X, Y, and Z. It's like, what are we doing with our health service? But more so, what are we doing to our nurses? And Lucy's locked up in a prison for something she hasn't done, as proven by 26 worldwide neonatologists, many doctors who were part of the 19 Nurses Network, and many nurses and legal people who were also connected with her case. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens next year with Lucy's case, because she needs to be freed, and she needs to be freed now. That case review is full of holes. There were so many documents that were missed, that were not put forward, that, you know, discussions that were not even considered, i.e. the maternal aspect of baby care and the impact of pregnancy on a baby when they're born. And I'll discuss that another time, because a fantastic obstetrician called Dr. Jim Thornton chipped in with this and did a fantastic talk. But again, that would take up a lot of time. But for Clare McGourley, putting the sort of legal and ethical standpoint as an objective person into what has happened with Lucy was very interesting. And the link between the rumour mill and what becomes an issue was a huge one. And I think we need to change this culture. We need to get rid of this horrible corporate aspect of healthcare that is a poison to our staff, because we've still got this, and I've mentioned it before, service, corporate, interface. They don't mix. They don't mix, in my opinion. They can't mix, because we're dealing with people, and people are complex. Healthcare is complex. Nothing is as it seems. And we know this if you just listen to people in A&E waiting room. Oh, this woman's gone in before me. Oh, this man went in before me. I've been waiting 10 hours. There are reasons why people go in ahead after half an hour or after 10 minutes. Things that only we know about. But because of confidentiality, we can't tell anybody that. And rightly so. But it starts the rumour mill. Someone will say it to the person next to them, and then somebody else will join in the waiting room and say, yeah, there was nothing wrong with her, and da. And all of a sudden it becomes a discussion around how awful the staff are, how they're unfair, how patients are being picked out at random to be seen first. Yeah, and this is the same thing, and this is exactly what Dr. Clare was mentioning. So Dr. Clare McGourley was just one of the many speakers, as I said, and I've quite a few more to get through. So I'll try and keep it brief if I can. But those key points were very interesting to me about how rumours start and where they lead to. And I think if we were at this point where there was more discussion at a local level with the staff, having more time to talk like we used to when we had 8-hour shifts, and we'd have earlies and lates, and there'd be an hour and a half overlap. And this is what we used to do. We used to teach and discuss things about the ward or the department, but we don't have that anymore, because we're all being forced to work 12 and 13 hours without a break, which is now unpaid. Back then it was paid. And we don't have that chance to be professional with one another and look at what the real issues are. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the NHS? I think it's something that needs airing and looking at, and the public need to start sort of beating that drum, because it's going, and it's going rather quickly. And there are lots of organisations online, on Instagram. Have a look and listen to what the doctors and the nurses are saying, especially when they're striking, because the strikes are not just about pay. They're a lot more than that. But the narrative, this is where it starts, the rumours are from people in power and authority, like the government, start the rumour it's about pay. It isn't about pay. Doctors don't go on strike just for pay. That is a valid concern, and why shouldn't they? However, it was a lot more than that. It was about training places, it was about the unpaid breaks, it was about the state and the lack of care and the lack of being able to do your job as a doctor or as a nurse. Yeah, it was a big subject, but people took it as doctors being greedy. And this is what Dr. Clare says. It all starts with a rumour and it snowballs. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll be back soon. Have a nice Christmas. Bye.